machine using graphics. So there's several ways to do this. We're going to have a class though, like we did before, a base class called state. And then we're going to create substates or subclasses for the menu, the credits, the game, the high score, I don't remember what else, but options. We're going to have subclasses for those things. And you can break those up. You can put every class in its own file. You can create a header and a source for every class, or you can roll all of these into one. It's kind of your preference. It depends on the scope of your project as to how many classes you should put in one file, and really it's also kind of just your personal preference. Not really a right or wrong here. In the game I'm working on, some of our files have over 5,000 lines in them. You know, some of them only have a handful of lines in them, 20. So it's kind of up to you and the scope of your project and what you're doing as to how many classes you throw into one file or how much you should break it up. It also kind of depends on how modular it needs to be. If it's something that you need to port around to other programs, you probably want to break it up more. But with that being said, let's add a class for our state machine. I'm just going to call it state. There's no base here, but we do want virtual destructor. Click OK. And this is our base class. We know we need some virtual functions here. Anybody remember what they are? State machine, 3 functions. Really, I should set these to 0 because they are pure virtual. And we'll find some other variables that we need as we go here, but there's our base class in its simplest form. Anybody think of anything else we need up here right now? Display, we'll I don't know how we're going to do display. I think we're going to want display specific to the subclass. We may want a base class display. I don't know. We'll see. Some of the stuff you don't know, you kind of wing it. We know we need subclasses though, so we're going to have menu. And I'm going to throw all of these in the same file, so don't let that freak you out if you've never seen this before. And we'll need to override every one of those base class functions. We're just doing declarations in the header file. We define these things in the source file. We also need a constructor and a destructor. What else? The base class definitely needs to be virtual, and if we were to derive from this one, it should also be virtual. But if we're not deriving, if this is the last one in the chain of inheritance, it doesn't need to be virtual, I think. Let's copy this and paste it down here, and we've got menu written 3 times. You can change that to options. Remember, one of the drawbacks of a state machine is you have a lot of code, a lot of redundant code. It seems to be redundant, but you'll have little changes here and there, and that's okay. Small price to pay for pretty cool functionality. And then we could do the other classes. You would have your credits and your high score and your game and whatever else, but we're just going to work with these for right now, and I'll let you put the other ones in there later. Alright, this class is going to need, this base class is going to need a few different things. We know we need one window and one renderer. So I'm going to copy this stuff out of main. These 2 lines, leave the init there for now. But I'm going to copy these 2 lines, or cut them rather. And we're going to paste those over in state. Now we're going to have to break it up. We're going to declare it up here. And we'll define it over in the source file. Now to do this, I need to include SDL. Another thing, we're going to have a background image for every state. So let's put that in there. I normally would make this something shorter, but for the sake of teaching and so you know exactly what it is, I'm going to make it long. That way you know what that is for. We're going to need a few other things. We'll need some state pointers. Anybody remember what these are? Current, menu, options, you'll have other ones later. Out of all this stuff, which ones need to be static? Renderer should definitely be static. Do we need more than one renderer? Remember, when you create an instance of menu, it's going to create the menu object and it's going to create a state object. And then when we create options, it will create an options object and it creates a state object. And we don't need a window for every state. One window is good for the whole program. One renderer is good for the whole program. What about the background texture? That changes, so we need leave that alone. What about the state pointers? States change, but the pointers are good for the whole thing. We have one for each state. The only one that changes really is current, and it points at different ones, but it's still the same pointer. So you're going to want these to be static. Now, when we do a static class variable, you don't have to do this if your static variable appears in a function, but in a class, we have to initialize this guy in global space. So we're keeping that in mind. We need to initialize our static variables, and we also need to define our window and our renderer. So I'm going to head over to state CPP and my constructor here. Actually, let's take care of the statics first. Up here at the top, I give the data type. So we have a window pointer. I give the scope, the variable name, and I normally just set that to 0. So you're going to do that with the renderer. And we're going to do that with our state pointers. Now all our static variables are initialized, and we can paste in what we took out of main into our constructor. Now, this is important. Everyone pay attention. This caused a lot of problems yesterday. You need to delete this data type here. We've already declared that thing, and so if you leave that on there, it's going to make a different one, and the one you have for the class will not work. Now, this only needs to happen if we have not created it. It only needs to happen the first time around. So I'm going to put an if statement here, and I'm going to say if there's no window yet, we set it to 0 up here, that will come in here, and that will give us a 0. So if not 0, or if it is 0, that's what I should say. If it's false, we're going to create it. And then every other time its state is called, when we create the other states, this will be skipped. Only happens once. That's what we're going for there. We're good so far? Let's check and make sure this builds. Go ahead and just click build solution. We're not going to run it. We just want to build it. Okay, as long as it's succeeded, we're probably okay. All right, that's a pretty good start. What else do we need to do? When you're programming something, when you're going to make a program, you got to think about it. You got to think, what am I going to do? How do I approach that? What's my goal here? What's next? What are we trying to do? Okay, we can get a background in here. So state itself doesn't get a background, but all of its subclasses have one. So we can start fleshing out these things. Now, you can cheat. You can click on the light bulb here and just tell it to define that for you. It saves you a little bit of typing. Do that for the destructor. You can do that for your virtual functions. Maybe. There's probably a way to generate all of these. I know in NetBeans you can just generate all of them. And it will even do setters and getters for you and stuff like that if you want to do private variables. But there's menu. So let's hop over now and see what it did for us. Alright, so here's all our menu stuff. Our constructor, destructor, enter, update, exit. Can you tell how long this source file is going to be after we cram 5 states in here and fill this out? The actual game content and update is probably going to be pretty heavy. But that's okay. You want to get comfortable working with big files. But you also want to know how to bust it up if you need to bust it up. Alright, so menu constructor, what happens here? Set what? Okay, let's load the background. Constructor is going to load in a background. So we have background texture equals img underscore load texture. And we pass it the renderer and we pass it a string. Hopefully it's menu or main menu .png. Now up here at the top you can include SDL underscore image. You could do this in the header file. I'm not sure which is better, but definitely need it here to get this image load function. SDL underscore image dot h. So that loads our background texture for main menu. Now you have to have this file in your project folder. If you called yours something else, don't just blindly copy what I wrote there. Yours has to match your file. What else needs to be initialized here? Maybe nothing. If we can't think of anything else, it's all right. Let's move on. What else do we need to do? What should happen in update? What should happen in enter? We enter the menu, what happens? What? I can't hear you. We need to draw at some point, definitely. We can have a draw function, or we could draw in update. Either way, we'll either call draw from update or we will draw in update. But yeah, let's just make a note of that. We need to draw at some point. Enter. There's a few things you may want to do. You may want to start up some music for the menu. You may want to center the mouse on the screen. I don't know. That's the only thing that's coming to my mind right now, but usually other things happen. What else in update? when you get some input at some point, right, we want to be able to change states. So that needs to be in there. We're going to have buttons. So we'll need to, it's kind of tied with changing states, right? But we need to update the buttons, check the buttons. We need a mouse, right? That's part of the input. Exit. Some things you might want to do here is disable the mouse. Maybe stop the music. Or change music. Maybe play a sound. So this is what you do. You think about what you want to do, what your program should do, and I like to write it in comments first. That way I can kind of organize my thoughts, and then we'll go tackle these guys. Music is not important right now, so we're not going to do that. We don't have a mouse yet. We will need to get a mouse. And we don't have buttons yet, so we need to get those. The input and the draw, those we can work on now. What do we need for input? Does anybody remember? A do loop? We need a loop. I wouldn't use a do loop, but we need a loop. We'll put a 1 there for now. We may come back and change that to a Boolean. All right, how do we get input? There was an event loop. Remember, we had a SDL poll event function. We had a switch. We probably want an event handler in every state, so let's go back to the header file and put one of those in there. SDL underscore event. That's up in the base class, so we have one in every state. And then down here in menu we can write, or down here in update we can write while SDL underscore poll event. We'll pass it our event by reference. So while there's something in the queue there, we'll handle that event. We can set up a switch. Event type. And we know we have a quit event. So if this happens, that means they click the X or something like that. We can shut down SDL. And then do std exit 0. Now I don't like doing it this way. This will need some help. But all right, in order for that to work, we'll, right here? Okay. Now it doesn't see exit 0, so we may need to include IOStream. So I'll include IOStream up here at the top. Now I can see X is 0. So we'll go back and correct this later on. I think I want to put some bools in here, and we'll just turn those booleans off, and we'll actually shut this thing down properly, but this will work for the moment. Okay, we may have other events in here. If you wanted controller input, or if you wanted certain types of keyboard input, you could probably do that here, and there's other events, mouse events, things like that you might want to handle with this poll event. But next thing I want to do is draw. I'll label my brackets so I know what's going on where. I'll need to draw in the main loop, but not in the poll event loop. So if we don't have a separate draw function, if we want to draw right here, we need SDL_render_clear, SDL_. How do I get my background image on the screen? Render copy. Pass it to renderer. Pass it to texture. If we don't give it any rectangles, it's going to draw the whole image on the whole screen. And for a background, that's probably fine. And what's the last thing? Present. Render present. And that should get our image on the screen, hopefully. If you have a main menu PNG, I'll have to go get mine. All right, so we've got all the classes set up, but in order for this to do anything, we're going to have to create a class. We have to call these functions. For the moment, I'm going to do this in main. We may change this later on, but we can say we're going to have to include state.
Wait, we're including arbitrary includes main and state.
We are, and it's probably fine, or you can scrap this one. You can actually scrap both of these. If IOStream is included in state.h, I think I put it in the source. So yeah, we'll have to move that over. Actually, yeah, move that over. Did I lose anybody there? We'll put IOStream in state.h. That way we can include state.h up here, and we'll have IOStream. Next, we'll need to set up our pointers. So current, menu, and options. Menu equals new menu. This is state menu. Don't forget, you have to specify the scope. There's no parentheses there. And then I can call current sorry, state current. Enter state current update. Exit. Maybe this time we get an image on the screen. Build errors. It doesn't like my call to options here. So if I go back to state, I never, like I declared these functions here, but I never defined them. So let's do that. We can cheat. We can use the light bulb if you want to. But we need to get a definition for every one of these guys. We're not going to write anything in there for right now, but we'll at least get something there so it will build. And then it should run, hopefully. Yeah, it should have your main menu up in the window, and it should acknowledge your click to exit. Okay, we've got an image showing up. We need to get a mouse cursor. I mean, we could use the default, but that's lousy. And we want to get buttons on the screen. Let's do the mouse first. So for a mouse, anything you can think of as an object, you want to create a class for that object. So we're going to add another class, and it will just be called mouse. We're not going to derive it from anything, and it will probably have nothing derived from it, so it's just mouse. In the header file, we'll include SDL, and we will include SDL image. I don't think we need IOStream here. I don't know, we'll see. Alright, so what is a mouse? What do we need for a mouse? A cursor. Alright, we'll need a position. We need an image, right? You want a custom pointer? So I'm just going to call it text. What else do we need? Now for the background, we didn't need this because it stretches across the entire screen, but a cursor is going to be confined to a small space. What do we need for that? Rectangle. What else? I think we want an update function. Now this is not a state machine, so we're not doing enter exit update. This is just update the mouse. Okay, that's a start. Let's start fleshing this out. In the constructor here, we want to load in our image. So texture equals img underscore load texture. We pass it to renderer and whatever you called your mouse pointer. That's a 50 by 50 image you should have from last week. Now we have a problem. Now we have to have the renderer to load this thing up. How do I get the renderer over here?
Have it to where it passes in the value.
Okay, so we'll pass it. Now if our definition says we're going to pass in a renderer, our declaration has to match that. So back over in the header file now, close that out. We're going to pass in a renderer. Okay, that's the load here. What else do we need to do? We want to set up our rectangle, right? What's the starting position? If you want to go top left corner, you can go 0. If you want to center it up, you could do that, and then these would be different lines. Like that. If you wanted it centered, really I think the update's going to override the center, so we can start this at 0. It's not going to matter. But the height and the width do matter. If you have done this as specified, it should be a 50 by 50. If it's not, you'll have to change that. We've got an update function. We should also make a draw function. But before we do draw, let's update. In update, SDL has a function that will check the mouse based on the operating system. So your mouse will transition between your program and the other Windows or whatever pretty seamlessly if you want to use this. You can also set it up the hard way with your own acceleration and all that. That's a lot of fun, but this is the easy way. You're going to do a get mouse state. And get mouse state returns something about the button state of the mouse. It doesn't return void, it does return something. But if we're just looking at position, it takes an X and a Y int pointer. Now we have a rectangle that keeps track of our mouse. So we can use those integers and just pass those in, and it will set our rectangle based on the position of the mouse. So let's try that. It calls for a pointer, so we have to pass the address. But we will pass those in, and now it will position our rectangle wherever the mouse is. Remember, that's the top left corner. And there's update for the moment. We'll modify update later. There will be more contents to this, but for the moment, this will work. And now we need a draw function. So over here we can declare draw. Draw will also need the renderer. And then we can define that. If you want to switch files, you can. If you want to use the peek window, you can do that. You can draw with render copy. Pass it our renderer, our texture, null, and our rectangle by reference.
Does render copy
renderer, the texture, this other rectangle if we wanted it, and then the actual rectangle where it draws. Okay, now if all that is working correctly, let's go back to state. We'll drop down into our menu update. We got to create a mouse. Where would we create a mouse? In a game like Asteroids, you would have a mouse on every screen except for gameplay. But you would have one on menu and options and credits and so on, right? So it's up to you. Do you want to create a mouse for every state, or do you want to create one static mouse for all states? Static mouse for all states? We can do that. That seems most efficient. So, like we've done every other static thing, let's do that. Up here at the top we'll include mouse.
Mouse has SDL.h.
It does, but it won't be a problem. As long as you have this pragma once up here, it should be fine. And then out here we can do mouse pointer, state, mouse. And we can put this in our if statement. Mouse equals new mouse. And mouse needs the renderer. And now we have a mouse in every state. Just the one. Now the object exists, but we're not doing anything with it. So in our source file, here's where we might want to center the mouse. So you can do that if you want to. But more importantly, we need to update the mouse. So here, mouse, update. After the poll event, before we draw things. And then we need to draw the mouse. Where would you draw the mouse? After clear screen? Or before clear screen? Before? If you draw the mouse and then clear the screen, are you going to see the mouse? Okay, let's try again. What are we going to do? Okay, so we clear the screen, we draw the mouse, and then we draw the background on top of it. Right? Or do we draw the background and then draw the mouse? Yeah. And draw will get a renderer. Alright, well, let's see if we have a mouse. That works. Now, if you've done it correctly, you should have the regular mouse cursor being drawn on top of your own mouse cursor, and that's pretty lousy, so we want to turn that off. So to turn off your mouse cursor, close it out, when we create this mouse over in the mouse constructor, we're going to call SDL underscore show cursor, and you're going to pass it a 0. That's going to turn it off. So now when you run it, it should only be your image. And then if you go outside your window, your regular cursor comes back. But inside your window, it's just your custom cursor. Well, everything's drawn from the top left corner, so it should be off center. All right. Let's keep rolling. We've got a mouse. Now we need buttons. Buttons are objects. We make a class, and we call it buttons, or button. Not deriving from anything, and I don't think anything will be derived from it, so we'll just leave it as that. Button's going to have texture. It's going to have, check this out, I'll show you what we're doing here. This is what your image should look like. Hopefully yours looks better than mine, but this is the layout. You should have 6 buttons. They should be on one sheet, like a sprite sheet. And what's going to be different here, and up until now we have drawn the entire image every time we put an image in. The player was its own image, we used the whole image. This time we're going to be using a piece of an image. And this is where the other rectangle comes in with your render copy functions. So we're going to have a source image, and that's going to be this rectangle. And we're going to have destination rectangle, and that's going to be wherever you're drawing this thing. Does that make sense? So X and Y is the top left corner, remember that. If I want to draw start button here, what's my X and Y for that? 0, 0, because that's top left corner. Now if my button is 64 tall and I want to draw options, what's my coordinates for that? 0 on the X, 64 on the Y. You get it? So we're going to have a source rectangle that moves along the sprite sheet, and we're going to have a destination rectangle where we're drawing the thing. That being said, we're going to load in this texture. This should be static because we only want to load it in once. We need to include SDL. We'll need to include SDL image. Buttons will need an update and a draw function. Draw is going to need the renderer, or we could set up a pointer that points to the renderer and it would always be available. However you want to do that. What do y'all want to do? Pass it? Okay. We can stick with that. That's nothing wrong with that. We'll pass it. If we load this texture in the constructor, it's going to need the renderer as well. Something else, a button needs a bool. Every button's going to have two states. It's either selected or it's not. And you may want to play sounds whenever you select them or whatever, but that'll be for a later date if we have time. So there's at least something to get us started. Let's create all our functions here. Define draw, define update. We'll modify that constructor, and we need to initialize our static variable. So in comes the renderer to our constructor. Renderer. It's a terrible word. Terrible word. Well, you need to name this. You need to type whatever you called yours right here. Don't just copy what I did. This is img underscore load image. No, load texture. I don't know what I'm thinking. Texture. There we go. That loads that up. We need to initialize our static variable. I'll put an if statement here so this only happens once. Oh, we said we needed two rectangles. Forgot those. Back over in the header file. We're going to have a source rect and a destination rect. Remember, the source is the one on the sprite sheet, the destination is the one on the screen. And we'll initialize those. So srect dot the height and width, if we followed the instructions, should be the same for everybody, right? So what's the height of the button? 84?
Oh wait, no, that's the button. It's 64 by 192. Sorry, I was looking at the sheet.
It says 192. X and Y. This is going to be different for every button. So how do you want to handle that? We can pass it in. At least for the source, we can pass it in. So every time we create a button, we have to tell it where on that sprite sheet we're going to draw from. So let's pass in a X and a Y. Actually, I think these are integers. You can't have half of a pixel. You can only take the whole pixel. So let's modify our constructor to take in two integers. Am I going too fast? Is everybody good? Now for the destination, we'll need to set that for each button, and it's going to be different depending on what screen the button's on. So let's just make a function for that. So we can have a void set position, and this will take in two integers. X and a Y. And then we can set the destination rectangle based on this X and Y. So direct.x equals X and direct.y equals Y. So we set the source when we create it. We set the destination when we call this function. What's the draw going to be like? This is a little bit different than what we've done before because we're drawing from a sprite sheet. We're still going to have render copy with the render and the texture, but instead of putting null here, we're going to put our source rectangle. And then the other one's the same as it's always been. It'll be the destination rectangle. Are we good? All right, let's make some buttons. Back over in state.h, menu. We're going to need a button. We're going to need buttons in all these classes, so we'll include button.h. And we'll drop down here into menu. Now menu's got a lot of buttons, so you probably want an array or something else called a vector, a different vector than what we've done. But just to get started, we're going to create a button. We'll just create a button pointer. We'll call it main button. No, we don't have a button to main from main. Where are we going from main? From menu. Options button. Don't make that a capital. Don't. Options button. Alright, and then let's go over to the source file and create this button. Button equals new button. We're going to pass in not button, options. Options button. Options button equals new button, and it gets a renderer. Why is my IntelliSense letting me down? A renderer, an integer, and an integer. So what's our two integers? Not for options. I don't know. On yours, options may be at the very top. But for mine, this is not the very top. 64 down. So 064. Now, if your options button is somewhere else, you need to find out where it is and plug that in. If you're really lazy, do you know how big this is? How big was this image?
384 by 384.
So we could do like 384 divided by 6 times 1. Does that give me 64? I kind of regret doing this now. 384 divided by 6, that's 64. And so if it was the second image, I could do times 2. That would move me down to 128. That would move me down to the third button, and so on. But that's kind of lousy. But it works. There's where my options button is, 0 and 64. When we create a button in the constructor using new, now we're only going to create a menu once in this entire game, hopefully, so this is not overly important, but it's a good practice. If you use new in a constructor, you need to use delete in the destructor. Or eventually you end up with heap corruption and memory leaks and things like that. I don't know why I put parentheses there. And now down in menu update, we can update our button. That doesn't do anything right now, so don't worry about updating it, but we do need to draw it. Where would we draw it?
Underneath the mouse wheel.
Here?
Yeah. Wait.
So you want your button?
No, above mouse button.
You want your button behind your mouse?
Yes.
Mouse should be on top of everything, really. So mouse should be last, and then we'll put button right here. Options button. Draw. And draw gets the renderer. Now we forgot to do one thing. We need to set where we're going to draw this thing. So options, set position. For the X, I would like it centered. I know my screen is 1280. If I cut that in half, that will put the top left corner at the center. But that's not the center of your button at the center, that's the top left corner, so it's going to be offset. So if you want to fix the offset, you're going to subtract, how wide is the button? 192 divided by 2, the half width. Oh, that's just the X. We need a Y. Where would you put the Y? Think about it. How many buttons are going on this screen? Just one at the moment, but I mean, normally you're going to have like start, continue, options, credits, high score, exit. I don't know. We'll just put it on there somewhere. We got the X centered. The Y, we'll just play around with it and find a good value. Everybody understand the math here. I took half of the screen. See, my screen is 1280 wide. I cut that in half. So that moves the top left corner of the button to the middle. But I want the center of the button in the center of the screen. So I subtract the half width of the button. And you could crunch these numbers out and just hard code one number in there, but it's easy to derive it like this, and the computer can do the math for you. This is in the constructor. It only happens once. The compiler will probably do this when it builds it, and we're not wasting any clock cycles. That should get you a button in the center of the screen. Well, I didn't get one. What did I do wrong? When this happens, when I think I've done everything right and something's not showing up, I go to my draw call and I check this out. So I just put a breakpoint here, and I'll run it in debug mode, and it's going to stop here. Now, when your debugger stops, this line has not been executed yet. It is about to be executed. So I'm going to step in. That means I want to go into this function, this draw function, and it takes me there. I'm going to step over until this arrow is pointing at this, and I'm going to look at everything. First thing I want to look at is my renderer. I put my mouse over there and I make sure there's some address at that pointer. If this is null, I have a problem with my renderer. Then I'll look at my texture. I need an address there. I got one. If that's null, that means that texture did not load. It couldn't find the file. The renderer was null. Something went wrong. If your texture's null, something went wrong when it tried to load it. Probably. I'm going to look at my rectangle. Do y'all see a problem here? Yeah, they're out there in garbage land. So I would not expect to see an image if my source is in garbage. So somewhere I forgot to set the source, or it got erased. Now this is height and width. We passed in X and Y and we never did anything with it. Okay, so there's our problem. But do you see how I found that? I went to the draw call and I analyzed those variables until I found something that was out of place. And then I backtrack and I say, okay, I passed in an X and Y to set that, but I never did set it. So srec.x equals X, srec.y equals Y. And if you caught that earlier on, more power to you. But stuff like this happens, and it's important to know how to go back and find it and fix it. So now I'll try again. I don't need this. Get rid of my breakpoint. And you should have a button on the screen now. If you don't, do what I just did. Put a breakpoint at the draw call, check out your variables, see what's going on. Okay, we want to be able to interact with the mouse. We want our button to change when it's selected. There's a function SDL provides, and you can write this function yourself pretty easily. But SDL provides one, so we'll just use that. It's going to take in two rectangles, and if those two rectangles are on top of each other, it's going to return true. And if they're not, it's going to return false. So we'll have our mouse rectangle right here, and we'll have our button somewhere on the screen. And we just want to check, is this intersecting with this at any point? So if it was like this, we would get a false. And if it was like this, we would get a true. Or like this, we would get true. All right, if this happens, if that function returns true, at any point, we want to change our button. We want to switch it over to the other side. Our source rectangle needs to move over on the sprite sheet. And we'll change that bool to selected equals true. You don't follow what we're doing here? Does this make sense? Now, this creates a small problem. Normally, your buttons are lined up on top of each other like this. And now what, in this case, what's the problem? We've got two buttons selected. So we're going to modify our mouse class a little bit. We're not going to use the mouse rectangle. We're going to add a rectangle to our mouse right up here. It's going to be 1 pixel. That's the one we're going to check. Does that make sense? All right. Everyone follows the concept of what we're going to do here.
Say that, just that last bit.
Okay, we've got a problem. If the buttons are close together and we use the entire mouse rectangle, this is what we're drawing here. Now, this is our custom mouse cursor. We don't want to select two buttons at once. That would give bad behavior when we try to change states. So instead of using the entire mouse rectangle, we're going to make another rectangle in our mouse class that is just 1 pixel. It's going to be the top left corner.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And then we're going to check that little guy for collision with these. And then if our mouse is over two at the same time, it doesn't matter because our collision is only based on that. So let's make our little rectangle. We'll go back to the mouse. We're going to add another rectangle. And I'll just call it the point. In mouse constructor, we'll set up our point. We'll start at 0. Update's going to override that anyways. But the height and width are important. Those are going to be 1. Tiny little rectangle. No, this is not going to be used for drawing. It's just used for collision detection. In our update, we're setting our mouse based on the operating system's mouse, but now we need to update our point. Our point needs to always be lined up with our mouse. So point.x equals rec.x, and it's important that this happens after this here. It'll be off a little bit. And point.y equals rec.y. Now our little mouse moves along, our little pointer moves along with the mouse. Our collision point does. All right, that takes care of the little rectangle. Now for collision, do you want to handle that in button or do you want to handle that in mouse? Button's going to change, so let's handle it in button. So button Update. We need to find out if the mouse is over the button, so we got to get the mouse in here. We can include mouse. Do we pass in the mouse? Who does mouse belong to? State? So, well, we create the mouse. We create the mouse up here, right? We said there was one mouse for all states. So it belongs to the state. The buttons are going to belong to a state as well. So we could pass in mouse, or we could set up another pointer in button to point at the same mouse. You can do it either way. It's kind of like the renderer. You can either pass it around or you can set up pointers. Want to pass it? Okay, we'll just pass it. Either way, yeah, we do need to include it. No. Mouse. Mouse. So in comes mouse, and update now we'll get a mouse pointer. And then we need to modify the source file, so update receives a mouse pointer. Now, in update, our button needs to be able to change states. We need to flip it back and forth between selected and not selected. We start off with nothing being selected, but if the mouse is over it, we change that, and we also need to change the destination rectangle. So I'm just going to start off by saying selected equals false. Every loop. We're going to start off with setting this guy to false. And then if the mouse is over it, so the function is called SDL underscore has intersection. And has intersection takes in two rectangles, like I said, and it's going to return true or false. So what's the first rectangle? Mouse point. And then what's the next one? Well, we don't have rect. Direct, right? It's the one that's being drawn. Now notice this function receives two pointers. So I can't just pass in my rectangles, I have to pass them in by reference. Anyways, if that happens, if we do have an intersection here, what's going to happen? What do we do? Source changes, selected changes. You might want to play a sound here. And then, yeah, source changes. We want to slide that source rectangle over to the right of our sprite sheet. So srect.x equals, how wide were they? 192. And then else we'll need to switch it back. Equals 0. So if it becomes unselected, we switch it back over to the left side. Draw is going to stay the same. Everything else, I believe, stays the same. So,
You never put in
I never call update, right? So over here in state, with our menu update, we need to update our mouse. Update our button. So after we update the mouse or before, it doesn't really matter. Options, button. Update. And it gets the mouse. Alright, so check that out, see if you get state changes of the button changes. And it should only work, it should go back and forth, that's important, it shouldn't stay stuck in either state. And it should only work if the top left tip of the mouse touches it, not any other part of the mouse touching it, it should be fine. Good?
So the top left part of the rectangle for my mouse is actually part of the mouse.
It's actually what?
I guess it isn't really much of a problem, but it looks kind of weird when my mouse isn't actually touching the channels.
Your cursor isn't drawn in the top left corner?
It's
I don't know what you're saying.
Looks like the image.
yeah, it's not signed properly, but it doesn't really.
So you can move your point. You can move your image. Do all kinds of things. You know how to move the point around. If you didn't want top left corner, you could use wherever else. You just have to change it in updates.
I didn't realize Land School still draws that red arrow on top of mine. That's kind of ugly. Anyways. Okay, what now? We need to be able to switch to options. When we click. Is that our next step? So, what do we need to do now? We've got options down here. Options doesn't have anything in it, so there's nothing to switch to. We could copy all this update from menu and paste it there, since most of this is going to be the same. And we'll have to change a few things. But we're still going to have a mouse. We're still going to do poll events. We're still going to draw, present, all that good stuff. So can we just scrap my comments? We can just copy all of this and paste it down into options. So let's do that. Let's grab our update function, the guts of the update function, Control C, and paste. There's no options button here, so we comment that out. It'll change later. We'll put a menu button in. But right now we just want to do a state change. The mouse is still good because we made that static, so that was a smart move. Did we create an option state yet? Yeah, we did. We created it. So that should be good. Really, the only thing we need to do is switch current to options when the mouse is clicked. Hopefully. Let's see if options draws. So instead of current state being menu, let's change that to options. I'm in main. So our starting state will now be options. Let's just see if this even works. Okay, I don't have an image for options, so I want to go check that out. So on our menu constructor, we loaded in a main menu image. Let's do that in options. So here, background texture equals img load texture. It gets the renderer and what did I call it? Options PNG. That's a string. So options constructor, we need to load in the image for options. Now, maybe this time. Hey, options works. So now, back in main, I'll put this back on menu. And I just have to modify the code so that when that button is clicked, what we just hard coded happens. Current gets switched over to options, and then we'll want to be able to put in a button in options, and it'll switch back to menu, and we've got state changing, a polymorphic state machine with graphics. It's going to be so cool. So this happens in state.cpp. All right, we need to handle the mouse button being clicked. Where to do this? I think it is an event type. So I don't know this off my head. I'm going to have to look it up. SDL Wiki. SDL Wiki, you can do API by category. And here we go, input events, mouse support. And there's, I don't see anything for click event. All right, so I don't see it here. I'm going to back up. Go to event handling. Here's something, mouse button event. There's also motion, there's a wheel. Let's try button. Okay, so our type is going to be a SDL button down or SDL button up. Normally you want to go with button up. That way if you start to click on it and you're like, and you can back off. And so button up. And then there's the button that changed, see remarks. Okay, so we got a left, a middle, a right. I love this. You can add your code example here. Some of them actually have, codes there, and that's nice. But so here we go. We know our event type. It's button up, and then we want to look at the type of button it is and make sure it's to the left. That way our right click doesn't change, unless you want it to do that. But let's try that. Here we go. So case, we do a quit. We want to be inside the switch. Case SDL underscore mouse button up. There it is.
Should we add a break to SDL?
I mean, this is going to kill the program, so it will never get to your break. Besides, I want to come back and change this later, and then we will add a break. But for right now, it would never get to that break statement. Okay, so if event dot type dot not giving me any other options here. Maybe it's dot button. Hey, there we go. If button equals, what did it say it was? SDL button left. I think there was something weird here where I have to do button dot button. There we go. So button is a type. I'm not sure where I get button dot button from. I'm not even sure that works. So,
It works.
does it? Let's just see if this works. So if our button is left, what's going to happen? We want to know if something is selected, right? So if our options button so if it is selected, and you can write equals true there if you want to, but it's not important. Current equals options. That's our state change. How does that work? Does not. So I'm going to see how far we get here. I'm going to put a breakpoint. I'm going to run this again. And I'm going to mouse over and I'm going to click it. All right, now it caught the button up event. That happened. And then it's going to check this out. If it skips this if statement, that means this was false. So I'll step over. It stepped in, so this is fine. And now it's saying this is true, true. Step over. Okay, current equals options. That worked. So all of this is correct. Step over, step over. And then it should go back to main. It did not. Okay, so there's our problem. We put this 1 in here and we can't get out of this place. It never goes back to main to rerun this loop. So I need a bool here. What should we call that? Running? Every state's going to need it, so let's put it up in the state class, base class here. Bool running equals false. Now, in CPP here, when we enter a state, we need to set that to true. We'll want to do that in options as well. And then instead of making this a while loop, we'll make it based on running. And then in my if statement down here, after I set current to options, I'll change running to false, and yeah, there should definitely be a break statement there. The break only gets us out of the switch, but because running is false, next time around this should stop. We should go back to main, and we should change states. Now let's fix this in options. So instead of making that one a 1, this also needs to be based on running. Now let's see if we can switch.
Where did you put that running equals false?
After the button click, all right, we're going to change states. That means we need to go back to main, and this loop needs to happen. The current state, we need to enter it. Well, we're going to leave updates, what's going to happen, and we're going to exit menu. We're going to enter options, and we're going to update options. So we get this. I jacked that up. Okay, and then where we have options button, we just need menu button. All right, so that'll be a menu button instead of options button. Current will not equal options, it will be menu. The rest of that stays the same. And then down here, instead of options update, we'll do menu update and menu draw. Is that easy enough? We just change menu, or just change options to menu. And now we need to create a menu button. So if we go back up here into main, or up in the menu, we did that right here with this code. So you can copy that and go down here into our options constructor, paste it, and modify it accordingly. And then we just need to declare a menu button in our header file. So in state.h, options, button, menu button. So it works. Now I do have a problem. I got to change this source. So in your options constructor, instead of setting that up for the options button, you can go ahead and just put this at 0. Or no, that one's fine. This one needs to be a 0. Or wherever your menu button is. But then that should work just fine. Mine says start. That's wrong. Mine needs to be, yeah, 64 times 2. So 128. Options, main menu, options, main menu. We have a working state machine. I went through that last part a little bit quick, so if you fell behind, let me know where you want to go back to.